is going to go into explaining assignment 1 of your explorations in typography assignment, specifically the indent, so the very first page that you're going to be typesetting. And before we jump into that, I just want to double check that our document is all set up to kind of re-explain what you did last week. So go on up to File, Document Setup, and just double check. Right now I just have one page set up because I'm going to manually pull more down. I have facing pages turned off because this is not a book, so I don't need my pages to be next to each other like a book spread. And I have a 11 by 8.5 document, so it's 11 inches wide. I set up my margins to be a 1/2 inch, except for the bottom, it's 0.75. And I also have bleed set up, 0.125 all the way around. I'm not actually using the bleed in this document, but I always tend to set it up anyway, just in case I have anything that I want to go right to the very edge of my document. I will actually put it right to the bleed line to make sure there's no white slivers of color along the edge. So I didn't change anything, but I'll click OK. And I'm also going to go on over here up into my master pages and double check everything is in there how I like it. And this magenta line around the outer edge is what we set up in the document setup. This red line out here is my bleed line, and this whole white space is my document size. And then I also went and dragged some grid lines down that I wanted to use within here, and I like to do that manually so that I can put them exactly where I want them. And you just find them right from the ruler up top here. You just click and drag, and they will be up there for you. You can drag down as many as you want. So I dragged one down here about 1 inch and a little further down, and then 2 of them here, and I'll show you why I have those. So I'm going to go ahead and click back into my page, and you can see the little A is on there to show that the A master is applied to this page, which is why I have all these grid lines. So this top line here I used for my header, which has my name, the class, semester, year, and also the assignment number and what the prompt is. So this is really helpful for me when I'm critiquing your work, so I know what your prompt was and I know what to focus my critique on. So that's nice to have right at the top up there. And it tends to get repeated over here with the specific callouts of your typesetting. And this is in your colophon, and I have this set up over here. So these are not in master pages because I need to edit the content. You are able to set these up in master pages if you would like, and you can select them. I think it's right click on that and choose to override the settings so it's editable within the page. I just set it up this way. I think both take the same amount of time, so you can do either one. And then all of this space in here is my active space for my explorations. So it's a nice big space, and you'll see why you need that because we're going to use it up pretty quickly. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my type tool and line it up, click and drag, and put it right in my active space here. So I am making sure that that space for my text block is in my active area, not outside. And this grid line I put here is specifically for that, and this grid line over here is specifically for the colophon. And they have a nice gap in between so that the type isn't crashing to each other. So I've supplied the type for you in the week 3 discussion, or in the week 3 folder, so you can grab that and copy and paste it right in. To do that, you can select Command A to select all, and Command C to copy. And when you come in here, you can select Command V to paste it in. And it is titled Type Builds Character. And there's a bunch of paragraphs and some footer information in there. So there's a lot of information in here that we get to use for our typesetting. And before I jump into the prompt, the indent, I have to set my type because this doesn't look very good right now. So again, I'm going to Command A to select all, and the first thing I'm going to do is reduce my point size. It defaults to 12 points, which is display copy. That's too large. So I'm going to just start at a 10 to begin with because 10 is, to me, about the biggest I tend to go. Every once in a while I go to 11 as well. And this is set in times right now, which is a larger typeface, but I'm going to change that. So I'm going to select all again, and I am going to choose Mrs. Eves, which is one of my favorites, and I'll just choose the Roman weight within that typeface. And I think this looks good. Typically, I would want to go in and also adjust the leading. And the leading is the line space. So if you add more, it will open up the line space a lot. That's a little dramatic, but I wanted to show it. Or you can reduce it and it will close it back up. And that had defaulted to 12. I normally don't keep only 2 points extra, but Mrs. Eve's set's a little small. It has a low X height, so that space in between feels really open. And I think I can get away with the 10/12. I'm also going to apply some tracking. I don't think this typeface needs a whole lot, but tracking is really helpful to help with rags. So to begin with, I'm just going to add +10. And what tracking does is add space in between each of the characters. And I selected everything, so it did it globally. Now the next thing I need to do is fix this column width. This is way too long. Most people don't have a very good time reading lines of copy this wide for a couple of reasons. We have a hard time finding the next line on our way back, and we tend to get a little tired if we have to go too far. If your head is actually turning to read the page, that's too wide. The general rule is about 4 alphabets long in that typeface and at that point size. Though I don't know anybody that actually spends the time doing that, so what I like to do is do it once and get a good feel for how long that is, and then just eye it as I move forward. So use that rule of the 4 before you eye it just to get a feel for it, but hopefully really soon you don't have to do that because that takes too much time. So I'm going to select all again, and instead of reducing my column width, I'm going to go and split it into 2 columns. And I'm going to, before I was clicked on this A up here, that's the character formatting controls. Right underneath it is the paragraph formatting controls. I'm going to click on that, and all the way over to the right, it's set to 1. I'm just going to split that to 2. And it automatically adjusts the gutter width in here, but if you find you need to adjust that, you can as well. I like the default for the most part, and I wouldn't normally say that, but in this instance, the default works really well, so I'm going to leave that alone. So this is working really nice. The columns are much better. The type is a little smaller and spaced out. So now we have to look at applying our indent. So the first thing that we're going to do is get rid of these extra space betweens because we are not going to need them. So you can just go ahead and delete them, and I will show you if I put my cursor here and I delete twice, it'll go right up to the same line of the paragraph before. So having it go under actually has 1 hard return, and to have that space, it actually had 2 hard returns. So I only need to get rid of 1 because I do want it to be on its own line, and I'm going to go ahead and do that with all of them. And it is definitely important to keep that hard return in there, that 1, to keep it on its own line, so that when we set our indent up, it gets applied. I'll explain that in a minute. So instead of selecting all, I'm actually just going to select, I'll start with a select all to show you. And I'm still in the paragraph formatting control up at the top here. And I'm going to look at this icon right here, the little arrow pushing that first line over. So that's showing you the literal indent. And what we're going to do is we have to figure out how much to indent it in. You can just go ahead and use these controls, but it's much better to call out the specific indent and have it set based on the point size of your type. So you'll notice over here I have 1 M indent. And M is literally the width of the M in that typeface and at that size. And they add a little space at the edges as well. So I want to do a 1M indent, which I tend to find to be enough for indent. 2M is probably about as big as you want to go. Otherwise, it's kind of an ugly gap at the beginning. So 1 seems to work really nice. That's what I'm going to stick with, especially for this typeface because it's delicate. And I'm going to go right up here. Oh, actually, I have to check my point size first. I'm going to go back to the character controls and check I have a 10 point size. So now back to the paragraph controls. So a 1M would be 10 points. And I'm going to go right in here where this indent icon is. Select the whole thing because it defaults to inches and I want to work in points. And just put P10. So everything that has a hard return applied to it has an indent now. And there's definitely ways to get rid of that, and that is with a soft return. Before I do that, I'm going to actually get rid of these indents up here because I don't need them. And I'm going to do that just by selecting the type. So I don't need this header and the byline to be indented. So I'm just going to go ahead and zero that back out. And I also don't need this first line to be indented either. Oops. So I'm going to go ahead and zero that. The reason why I don't need the first one indented is because I know it's a first paragraph because it's the very first line of type. And I also prefer to have a nice hard edge here. So my type is beginning really lovely on the grid line over at the left. So now I have it set up with all my indents where I want them, except for I have them over here in my footers where I don't need them. So I'm actually going to turn those off. And I'm going to do that by soft returning. So I brought it back up a line, and I'm just going to hit Shift Return twice. And I'm going to do that for all of them. So that's going to give me a big gap here, but I do want that in this area. One thing you might notice is I have this little red box here, and that tells me I have overset type. That means there's type going beyond my grid line. So there's a couple of things I can do. I can open up my workspace because I need more room, or I can change my type setting so that the type is fitting in the space a little better. And that's the decision I'm going to make. So what I'm actually going to do is use this grid line at the top for my body copy instead of my header. And now I've gained all this space down here, and I can move my text block right back down. And oh, it looks like I actually copied in quite a lot of extra type down there, so I'll get rid of that. So, and one other thing I'm also going to do is increase the hierarchy in my header so that it stands out from the body copy. So that way when I land on this page, I can read type builds character first. So I'm just going to bump it up a couple of point sizes and make it bold. And then this byline, I'm going to keep it the same size as my body copy, but I want to set that off low in hierarchy as well. So I'm just going to make it italic. And then to compensate for the larger point size, I need to adjust the leading because it's now kind of crashing into my byline there. And I think 1 point is enough. Now I also need to double check that that's back on the grid line, and it is. And double check down here that this is back on the grid line, and that is. Now I have the ability to see all of my type. And I'm going to soft return again. I still have this line right here because what I just realized I did is copy this type in twice over here. So instead of spending the time during this video to delete it, I am going to just leave it down there. And we'll just go ahead and ignore that, though I normally wouldn't want to do that. So one other thing I want to do is to change the hierarchy of this footer. So this should be low in hierarchy, and I'm going to bring it down a point size and compensate the leading by bringing that up a point size. And I think I'm actually going to make that gray so it stands out. And I think 70% gray would work well. And it does. I like that. So now I have all of my type set up with indents, except for this footer area, which I'm just using a hard space between, and I'll explain that later. Now one other thing I'm going to want to do is baseline align this type. And you can do that with 2 steps, so it's not terribly hard. To select it all, and I'm just going to select the body copy and double check. Where did it go? Back on my paragraph controls up at the top here, all the way over to the right, we have these align baseline to grid. So what that did is it took all of the type spanning across the column and made it baseline aligned. What it's not doing that I want it to do is have this type up here share the baseline down here so that this area up here is only for my header. And one other thing I'm going to do in here is actually delete these extra spaces because it feels too big. There we go. And now it's back on the line here. And this one here, instead of hitting return, I'm going to hit shift return. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with another indent I don't want. So I'm just going to shift return that right down so that those lines are all lined up together where they should be. One other problem I have over here now is I've lost my footer number 3. So I have to decide that I have to make some changes. I also just noticed here I got an extra space And something funny is going on here. So my indent got kind of messed up. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. Put that back in. There we go. And that saved me another line, but not enough. So we have to figure out what we're going to do with that. And I think a couple of things I can do with that. I'm going to select all my body copy. And I'm going to see what I can do to adjust this. I'm going to see if maybe I don't need these 10 points of tracking. I don't think I do. Now it appears that my problem down here keeps shifting, so I'm not exactly sure what's happening. But I am going to fix that. There we go. Every once in a while this happens, and I'm not entirely sure why all the time, but I think I've got it fixed. Great. Now with those changes, we also had some hard returns in there with this type when we were trying to baseline align it. So I need to bring that back up because we don't want that big gap down there. I'm going to put that right back on the line here. Perfect. Almost perfect, actually. So we have a couple of errors. One is we have this widow here, which I don't want. So we need to get rid of that. And this is 3 lines of type, which we do want, but this last line here is just 1 word. So I kind of don't count that. So we need to figure out what we're going to do with getting rid of this widow. And we have a couple of options. One option is to change the structure of the working space. So I might just see what I could do with that gutter here. I wouldn't go any more narrow than that. And if I go a tad wider, it does get rid of the widow for me, which is great. So I think I'm happy with that. It's a little bit of a bigger space in here, but not terrible. And I think I'll keep that. So I have all of my footer information in here, but I still have these 3 lines of type up here where I don't want them. But it looks like if I hit, soft return, down a few lines, I have it exactly in the space. And I know I still have that red mark here, but that is because I accidentally copied all the type in twice. So we'll ignore that. All right, a couple other things to look for is these footer numbers within the type, which is being called out over here. Those need to be superscripted. So I found 1, here's 2, and here's 3. And I also need to update my information over here. This is already set up for me because I'm just starting with that. So I have 10/12 Mrs. Eve's Roman. So I'm going to go ahead and update that. And I have my tracking over here set to 0. I have a medium column and a 1M indent. So you can notice that what happened is my Mrs. Eve's Roman went down a line because it's not wide enough over here. And if it had broke anywhere else, I might want to give it a soft return. But this 10/12 Mrs. Eve's Roman is a good break because Mrs. Eve's is the typeface and Roman is the weight. So I'm happy that that's on its own line. If its typeface was so long, it started kind of breaking into another line, I might choose to do a soft return so that I can control where the break is. So it makes sense to the reader. We want to put information together that belongs together. So that is indent, and also checking all the little details of your type. The last thing you want to check, and this is always the very last thing, is your rag. You don't want to make any minor adjustments to your rag unless it's the last thing that you're doing because you'll end up having to do it twice. So give it one more check, and I'm just looking for a general rag with no basic shapes. And I don't see any that are too shapy, which is great. And what I mean by shapes is every once in a while lines like these ones here will angle in or angle out. And I wouldn't say these are great, but they're not that noticeable, so I'm okay with ignoring it. If it was pretty noticeable, you'd want to make some changes. And the changes that you could make is a tracking change. That always helps a lot. Or you can consider a point size change or a column change. And the last ditch thing you want to do is any potential soft returns. And that's why I say to do this last, because you definitely don't want hidden soft returns in your document. but I might decide that like this A hanging out here all by itself is bugging me. So I'm just gonna put my cursor right in front of it and shift return it down, and that'll blend that in a little bit. I actually wasn't really bothered by that before, but I wanted an example. But general, what you're looking for with the rag is the lines to go in, out, in, out, in, out. So like this. This one's shorter, longer, shorter, longer. This one happens to go longer as well, but then it goes back shorter. This one also goes shorter, but then it goes back longer. So for the most part, it's in, out, in, out, in, out. And this big gap in here isn't all that pretty, but it is a new paragraph, so there isn't a whole lot I can do with that. So that's what we're looking for with rag. And because the settings in here are pretty decent, the column is wide enough, I don't have much work to do with the rag. So this should be all set. So that is Explorations in Typography Assignment 1 Indent.